We're going to discuss cell theory. And here we have some red blood cells, the smallest cells that are in the human body. So the average human being is composed of around 100 trillion individual cells. And yes, that is a lot of cells. It would take as many as 50 cells to cover the area of a dot on the letter I. In 1665, English scientist Robert Hooke discovered cells while looking at a thin slice of cork. He described the cells as tiny boxes or honeycomb, and he thought that the cells only existed in plants and fungi. In 1673, Anton van Leeuwenhoek used a handmade microscope to observe pond scum and discovered single-celled organisms. He called them animalcules. So as you can see in the picture below, if you saw these funny things that were floating around zipping about the pond water, you knew they had to be living, but these were very new discoveries to people who had not seen through a microscope before. Van Leeuwenhoek also observed blood cells from fish, birds, frogs, dogs, and humans. Therefore, it was known that cells are found in animals as well as plants. So he built on the ideas of Robert Hooke, who just thought they existed in plants and fungi. And as science often works, one person's ideas are taken and then built upon by another as new technological developments happen. Now, after Van Leeuwenhoek, we have this gap, but it's between 150 and 200 years. And so you find cells, great, but suddenly there's no more advances made in the understanding of these cells. And this largely comes from a widely held belief at that time that in spontaneous generation. So at that time, there was more of a folk understanding, or people accepted that the dirt, that mice came from dirty clothes on corn husks. And it was by the association alone that where there was dirty clothes and corn husks, there would oftentimes be mice. And so people would take that one step further and say, oh, so they just spontaneously come out of this process. Maggots, people thought they came directly out of rotting meat. They didn't have the association that maggots are actually the larval stage of a fly. So these full understandings of the process of how things even come to be as living organisms was not well understood even in the scientific community. So, much doubt existed about spontaneous generation, and this was really disproven by Louis Pasteur. Now, many of you have probably heard of Louis Pasteur, in that Louis Pasteur, we hear of pasteurization. He developed a process by which many of the bacterial cells are killed in different things such as milk by heating them up. So he realized there are these microorganisms that exist that can cause illness in our foods, and that can be in a hospital, lots of different locations, and that there are treatments if you do a treatment on those things, you can get rid of those bacteria. So remember, he's fighting this process that dirty clothes plus corn equals a mouse. And he had to find a way to disprove that, because most people were accepting this idea that spontaneously the mouse would appear. So Pasteur came up with this, and this was followed in 1838 by German botanist Matthias Schleiden, who concluded that all plant parts are made of cells. We're starting to see cell theory develop here, that all living things are made of cells. 1839, German physiologist Theodor Schwann also determined that animals' tissues are composed of cells. Okay, here now we have plants, animals, and they're looking more and more and finding, hey, these are all made of cells. In 1858, Rudolf Virchow, a German physician, did a study of cellular pathology. Now, pathology is the study of things that make one ill. And so cellular pathology is how the illnesses at a cellular level, which was a important thing to understand. And he concluded that cells must arise from pre-existing cells. Remember from our cell theory work we've already done already, this is one of the main components of cell theory, that cells come from pre-existing cells. So here below you're seeing the picture of mitosis and one of the phases of mitosis, and this is the idea of this splitting of cells gives you more cells, and there you have the new cell. So here's cell theory in its complete form. There are three basic components to cell theory. Number one, all organisms are composed of one or more cells. And Schleiden and Schwann both came up with this as early as 1838 to 1839. The second part, the cell is the basic unit of life in all living things. Again, Schleiden and Schwann came up with that in 1838 to 1839. And finally, the German physician Virchow came up with that all cells are produced by the division of pre-existing cells. And this happens both in prokaryotic and eukaryotic organisms. Now we add to this when we talk about modern cell theory. So we can add to these three basic concepts. And so in addition to the regular cell theory, we can also add that the cell contains hereditary information, DNA, which is passed on from cell to cell during cell division. Okay, so that is one of these four statements. The second one is that all cells are basically the same in chemical composition and metabolic activities. So the basic way a cell runs is the same from cell to cell. There are unique functions that are more active in one cell than the other, but the general functioning is the same. 3. All basic chemical and physiological functions are carried out inside the cells. So movement, digestion, all happen at a cellular level. So everything we think of when we think of chemical reactions and physiological reactions, this is all carried out in the cell area. And then cell activity depends on the activities of subcellular structures within the cell, or organelles. So cell activity is anything a cell does is really a matter of which organelles are functioning and how they are functioning. So this is this whole concept of adding organelles to the mix. So the cell theory has been used, and the basic discoveries about cells are used for many things, in especially understanding disease and health and medical issues. Anyone wanting to know more about medical issues needs to understand things at a cellular level. How we figure out how to cure AIDS, cancer, how humans have developed vaccines, cloning, stem cell research are all based in cell theory. So just to leave you with, it's an amazing thing to think that cells make up our bodies and are just as alive as we are. Humans are just an intricately designed community of cells which must work together to survive.